Welcome to the first 3 for Free Tips and Tricks tutorial. I'm Queer Joe, and this tutorial is going to show you a few things today about knitting in the round. And specifically, we're going to talk about how not to twist your knitting when you're joining your stitches in the round, how to avoid that initial jog at the bottom edge of your knitting when you join in the round, and the third tip is actually going to be knitting the actual hat. We're going to do the first tips and tricks in the first part of the video, and then we're going to switch over to a second video to finish off the hat. As part of this video, you're going to need 3 things. You're going to need approximately 120 yards of worsted weight yarn. You're going to need 2 sets of double pointed needles in US 7 and US 8, and you're also going to need a darning needle. Other than that, that's it, and we'll get started right now. Okay, to start the beanie, we actually are going to do casting on. We're going to use our US 7 needles, and we're going to use a long tail cast on. So you need to pull out enough yarn so that you have at least enough to both cast on with the long tail cast on for 81 stitches, and so we're going to add 1 additional stitch into the total number of 80 stitches that we want. And we're going to go ahead and cast on all on 1 double pointed needle the full 81 stitches. Now hopefully your double pointed needle is long enough. If not, you might want to use a straight needle or a circular needle to do your initial cast on. But basically what we're going to be doing is once we've cast on 81 stitches, we're going to do 4 rows of ribbing flat, not in the round. Most people would, directly after they're cast on, connect to work in the round. We're not going to do that. We're actually going to do the first 4 rows of ribbing in flat, back and forth. And I'm going to do it directly on my double pointed needles because I can scrunch 81 stitches onto mine. Mine are 8-inch long needles, so I can do that. So we're going to cast on 81. That's 3. $79, 80, 81. I really wish I could cast on quite that quickly, and I hope you were counting along to make sure that I actually have 81 stitches on my needle, but I'm pretty certain I do. And I could actually fudge it a little bit if I had to. So now I'm going to take my second double pointed needle, and I'm just going to start doing standard 1x1 ribbing, or knit 1, purl 1 ribbing flat. So I'm going to be going back and forth. $80, $81. And so since we started with a knit 1, purl 1 row on the right side, we're going to start with a purl 1, knit 1 on the wrong side, just like knitting flat and ribbing. I won't hold you to watching me rib 4 entire rows of ribbing, especially since I'm so slow at it, even with fast motion. So I'm going to come back as soon as my 4 rows are done and show you the first of the 2 tips and tricks that we talk about in terms of making this hat. Okay, so now we've gone and done 4 rows of ribbing flat, back and forth. And now we're going to switch to doing in the round. Normally, directly after your cast on row, you're going to start connecting in the round, but we waited 4 rows. So I'm going to continue in ribbing and put 20 stitches on each of 4 double pointed needles, and that'll bring me to a total of 80 before I actually go into the round. So this is our 5th row of ribbing. So let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18, 19, 20. Great. Go to your next needle, put 20 on your next needle. And we're keeping it in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing, 1 by 1 ribbing. $19, $20. Now go to your third double pointed needle and rib on 20 more. $19, $20. And finally on the last needle, on the fourth needle I should say, we're going to rib 20 more, leaving the last stitch to do our special trick with. Okay, so now what we've got is we have 4 double pointed needles with 20 stitches on each, and the final needle with 1 stitch on it. So basically what we're going to do is join in the round, and the way we're going to do that is by connecting the last stitch, the 81st stitch, this stitch right here, and join that directly onto the beginning of our first needle. So we're just going to slip it back onto the left hand needle. So now we have 21 stitches on this first needle, and we're going to take the first 2 stitches and knit those 2 together. So taking those first 2 stitches, knit them together as a knit stitch, and then continue on ribbing in a knit 1, purl 1. I'm just going to knit a couple more, or rib a couple more stitches before I show you what that looks like as a join. So now we've taken the last part of the end of our ribbing and attached it with that 1 extra 81st stitch to the first part of our new row of knitting. And that actually allows us to knit in the round. So we just completed 5 rows of ribbing, and now we've connected it. And the trick is, it's a lot easier to connect in the round when all your knitting is hanging downwards and it's easy to see. And 4 rows of ribbing in this case is a lot easier to see than 1 cast on row of ribbing, or 1 cast on row of knitting. And so as a result, it makes it a lot easier not to twist your knitting. It does actually leave this little seam, this small little opening here that needs to be sewn up, but we'll show you how to do that as part of the second trick, so that we get rid of that jog that we talked about and that uneven cast on edging when you work in the round. So I'm going to continue on and do 4 more rows of ribbing before I get to the basic part of the hat, the standard knitting part of the hat. I'm not going to make you sit there and watch me do that, even in fast motion. So we'll come back as soon as that's done. Now that we've completed 9 rounds of ribbing at this point, we're going to switch to just plain knitting. And so the next phase of the hat is actually 25 rows of just plain knitting stitch in the round. But we're also going to switch to our US 8 or 5mm needles at the same time. So just switching to the new needle, we're just going to go plain knitting, no ribbing, for a total of the 80 stitches in the round to switch them over to the US 8 needles. Once we've done that, I'm also going to, I normally don't do this until the end of the hat, but I'm going to show you the trick, and the second trick in terms of how to eliminate the jog in the round knitting. And so I'm just going to do this one row of plain knitting and then show you what it's going to take to seam up that little seam and get rid of the jog at the same time. Most people don't knit in the round so that they don't have to sew up any seams. In this particular case, you have to weave in your end anyway. And so let's go back to the opening part here. So this is the section where we did 4 rows of ribbing flat and then we knitted in the round. And as you can see, these two knit ribs combine into one when we combine that 81st stitch. And so we want to try to sew this up in such a way that this fabric meets this fabric evenly and there's an even cast on edge to the hat, and also that we combine these two knit stitches into one ribbing associated with this. So we're going to need our darning needle for that. So undo my little butterfly. Bow. Thread up using the cast on tail end of the yarn. I'm going to thread my darning needle. And the first thing we're going to do is show you where to insert the needle so that you get rid of the jog. So here's the slightly longer section, and we're going to insert that directly into the bottom 2 loops on the corner of the end of the first row of ribbing. So can you see that right there, those 2 stitches? We're going to insert them directly into those 2 little loops and pull it through and cinch it up. And what we get is we kind of ease that down and so that it's even with the cast on edge by doing that. And now we're going to, as we sew up this minor 3 or 4 stitch seam, it happens to be 4 rows, but it's going to end up being only about 3 stitches. We actually insert our needle into the right side of the rightmost rib and then over and into the inside part of the V of the left hand knitted rib. And when we pull those together, you see that it starts to combine into one ribbing instead of 2. And using the mattress stitch, we're going to do the similar thing, except we're going to put it into the left hand part of the left hand V and then into the rightmost side of the rightmost V of knitting. Okay, and snug that up a little bit. And similarly, we're going to go right to left and left to right. That's all it is. And I'll show you what the result is, which is really quite nice. So first of all, we've gotten rid of the jog pretty much. Still a slight piece there, and that can be pulled out through blocking if you've used wool for your knitting. But we've also combined the 2 knit stitches in such a way that it looks like one part of the ribbing. So in essence, when you take a look at the entire ribbing piece, it's a much more even join and an even cast on edge than you'd get if you did your knitting in the round. Now the next part of the hat is really very simple knitting and following of instructions. It's really going to be knitting plain 25 rows and then doing standard decreases. We're going to decrease 8 stitches every other row once we get to the crown of the hat until we get down to a total of 32 stitches. And then we're going to decrease 8 stitches every row until we get down to a total of 8 stitches. And then we're going to close it off by looping it through. That's going to be in the second part of the video. So if you want the third trick and tip technique part of this video, just watch the second video and you should be fine with that.